Hi, good morning to all. Uh, in this third semester, we are going to deal with your one of your core paper, that is psychological measurement and testing. And I think it is entirely different from the things what you have studied in your last semesters, like semester 1 and semester 2, that is basic themes in psychology. So this paper will be feeling you will be feeling it as somewhat different from that field. And there are some of the objectives for making this paper or including this paper within your syllabus. The main objectives like to offer foundation on psychological measurement and testing, and the other objective, that is to provide the basis of test construction and to build up skills on developing psychometric tests, and to familiarize the use of psychology and to familiarize the uses of psychological tests, and to make aware of ethical principles in testing, in psychological testing. So these are the main objectives of dealing this paper. Like you have to be very you should have a very good foundation on some of the psychological testing, and you have to understand about the measurements in psychology, and to provide a basis of test construction, that that we'll be making out some of the test, and we have to standardize some of the questionnaires or standardize some of the psychological test. So for that we'll be calling it as a test construction, and also to develop a psychometric build up skills, how to develop a psychometric test also, and to familiarize the uses of what are the we have to understand what are the uses of this psychology, and we have to familiarize with the what are the uses of these psychological tests. And the other thing is we have to make aware of the ethical side of or the ethical principles in these psychological tests, that is how to behave or how to do these tests. There should be some ethical principle within this psychological testing, that what we have to do in the sometimes we will be doing the test with the clinical side, or sometimes we will be doing with the questionnaires, or sometimes we will be doing with some of these survey methods like using of schedules or questionnaires again. So we have to understand the ethical principle we have to be followed when we are doing the psychological test. So these are the things these all things will give, or this paper will give you an outline related to the psychological test, how to conduct the psychological test. Okay, so we will be moving to some of the next modules. We'll deal one by one. So here we are going to start with what is psychological testing, because we are starting with the module 2, that to get a basis on what is psychological test. Okay, so psychological testing, that means all psychological tests are tools. When we heard about the psychological test, we'll be not knowing about what is that. So it is mean by all psychological tests are like a tools, that you will understand. Any tool can be administered of good or harm depending on how it is used. That we know that when we are using any tool, it can be it is an instrument, and it can be used for good and bad also. And how it will be useful, it is based on how we are using that, right? We are using it as a good one, so the use of that instrument will be beneficial for us, and if you are doing it in the wrong way, it will be not beneficial for us. So it is said like that. So psychological tests are some of the tools, and it can be an instrument, and it is used for knowing the behaviors of the people, or to understand the behavior of the people. That is the third point. The function of psychological tests has been to measure difference between the reactions of the same individual under different circumstances. That is, we are using this psychological testing to understand the behavior of the people in different situations or in different circumstances. So the behavior the person shows or the internal feelings or the uh, person's behavior will be different with different circumstances. So to understand that, we'll be using some of the psychological tools or some of the psychological tests to understand the behavior. So here you can see some of the definition which can be given by some of the people to psychological test. And according to Einstein 1966, psychological he defined that psychological test can be defined as a devices and techniques for the quantitative assessment of psychological attitudes of an individual. That is, we can see that the psychological tests are formalized measures of mental functioning, and most are objective and quantifiable. Certain projective tests may involve some level of subjective interpretations and all, also known as inventories. Like you may be knowing about inventories, measurements, questionnaires, and scales. And psychological tests these psychological tests are being administered in a variety of settings, like including schools and colleges, uh, universities, hospitals, and in healthcare settings, and some other psychologists it can be used. They come in a variety of formats. Sometimes it may come with a different format, like as we said, it is a technique or it is a device. So sometimes it may be come as a verbal form, and sometimes it will be with as a written form. And some of the tests nowadays, most of the it is being getting developed. Most of the tests can be administered in the computers. So these all are the way how the psychological tests can be done, and it can be also assessed by some of the tools. In the psychological tools also we'll be using for these psychological tests. And here we can see a definition. It is given by Anastasi in 1969. That is, a psychological test is an objective and standardized measure of a sample of behavior. So that is, the term sample of behavior refers to an individual's performance on tasks that have usually been prescribed beforehand. That is, the sample of behavior that make up a paper and a pencil test. The most common type of test are a series of items. Performance on these items produce a test score, and a score on a well constructed test is believed to reflect a psychological construct such as achievement and abilities, that is aptitude, emotional functioning, personality, etc. So that we can see that the psychological test not only include intelligence but also interpersonal attitudes. So uh, when we heard about the psychological test, the first thing will come to our mind will be the intelligence test, personality test, etc. And but not only that, it will also include the interpersonal attitudes and achievements, aptitudes. These all things can be tested with the standardized measures or standardized psychological tests. So here we are mentioning some of the characteristics of the psychological test. And the first one that we already said, that psychological testing is a sample of behavior. We are testing some of the pattern or some size of this behavior. We are doing it in that we are performing in a certain circumstances or certain period of time. And the other one, that behavior is obtained under standardized condition, that we can perform only the psychological test under some of the standardized condition only we can do that, or we have to do with some of the standardized tool only. And there are established scoring rules for obtaining quantitative information from the behavior of sample. That is, we will be using, or the method or the psychological test method what we are using, there will be some of rules, some of the scoring rules will be there for getting the quantitative information from the behavior of the sample of behavior. That is, we can only understand after through some of the numbers that the level of the variables that we are measuring. And some of the psychological testing originally devised for two purposes mainly, and that is to measure the intelligence and to detect or to understand the personality disorder. So these are the things that we have done in the previously. That is, first of all, when we are hearing about psychological testing, we will be thinking that to measure the intelligence and to detect the personality disorders in the clinical area. And the other one is the tests are, or the psychological tests are developed for some of the specific purposes, and it may include, we are going to give it one by one. And the first one is, most psychological tests are used for clinical purposes, and mainly the purpose is to identify the first one, that is emotional disorder and personality problems. And the psychological test mostly we are using in the clinical setting, and why it is being used in the clinical setting, mainly to include to understand the emotional disorder and the personality problem. Just because we cannot understand what all things or what all feelings is going with the person, that they can be done. So this psychological test or psychological testing is an method of introspection. That is, the person itself can complete it, what he or she feels within him or within her. And that is mostly these emotional disorders, things will come like that, that they will mark it out when they are getting some of the tests in the clinics through questionnaires or schedules. So it is a type of introspective method. And the other one is the personality problem. So it is also, we are the clinicians or the clinical psychologist or the person or the trainer will understand these problems through the questionnaires. So through conducting the psychological test, only the clinical psychologist can understand. And the other one is, the psychological tests are used to measure intelligence level, to identify intellectual efficiency of individuals. So that we already know that mostly the psychological tests are used for to understand the intelligence level of a person, especially in the school setting, and that we are conducting that the tests are being conducted in the schools and in the colleges or some other places, or even in the clinics, to understand the what is the intelligence of that person or intelligence of the child. So these are the common thing that we are doing, the clinical psychologists or the trainers are doing it regularly with the people. And the other specific purpose of the psychological tests are include, various psychological tests are used to measure the ability of classroom performance, like outstanding result or class attendance. So it is also being conducted, some of the psychological tests are being conducted to understand the ability of a child, of a student in the class, that we already said, like to measure the intelligence level. And the other one is, the major use of psychological test is to select and classify of industrial personnel representative. So it is also an specific purpose of conducting the psychological test, mainly in the organization setting, to characterize or to categorize the uh, industrial people. That is, a classification can be done by using some of the psychological tests, or selecting the candidate through conducting some of the psychological tests. They can be done, selecting of the candidate into the industrial setting. It can also be used, the psychological test can also be used for selecting and classifying the military persons, so that we know already that when the recruitments are going on with the military people or to the military camp, there will be these psychological tests. Some of the psychological tests can be conducted to for the selecting of the people into the military area, that they will be conducting some of the psychological tests whether they are apt or not. There it is being conducted through some of the questionnaires maybe, or to maybe some of the interview methods or some of the survey methods. They can be conducted, or in the scheduled form they will be conducted this psychological test, because the what as we said, it is an introspective method, that whether they are emotionally fit into enter into the field or not. And the other one is individual counseling is another major use of psychological test. So through conducting these psychological tests, we can come to a conclusion that whether the person should need an individual counseling or not. And the other one is the main objective of psychological testing is emotional well-being and effective interpersonal relationship. So the above points whatever we have mentioned, it will come up with the mostly with emotional well-being, because we cannot understand from the person whether the person is emotionally fit or not. So the feelings of that person, or the emotionality of that person being expressed through the questions, maybe answering the or assessing through the psychological tools only we can understand. That's why it is said that it is a main objective of psychological testing is to emotional well-being and effective interpersonal relationship. It is also being used with the understanding the interpersonal relationship also. And psychological tests are currently employed in the solution of a wide range of practical problems, rather than some of the theoretical knowledge. And the other important purpose of the psychological test, so it provides a standardized test or tools for investigating problems, like it is giving a standardized area or standardized test for investigating the problems in different areas which is dealing by psychologists. Like first one, you can see that it can be helpful in the lifespan developmental areas, and it can be helpful in relative effectiveness, that it will comes with the social psychology, and the outcome of psychotherapy, whether the therapy that they had given has any effective on the person, whether it is effective or not, through conducting the psychological test. And the effect of community propaganda and the influence of environmental variables, that we can say that whether the environmental variables, like whether this climatic change or some other factors which is being done with the environment, whether it have any influence on varies with the factors in the environment, whether it influence the person, whether they have any influence on the person itself. So the whether the environmental factors affect or it influence the person, so it can also be done by providing some of the standardized tests. It can be investigated. Yes, it can be done. It can help to investigate the problems, especially like lifespan development. So it is a best example that you will understand easily when we are saying that there will be some different span for life, right? So in different ages, like infant, or moving into childhood, moving into adolescence, and adulthood, like that. So when it is moving, we can understand that these all the things should be developed. Some of the things should be developed in different ages or different stages of life. So when the child is not showing, or these all things, some of the things that they want to behave, or sometimes they want to present it, so if they are not doing it, we will understand that there is some issues with the child in the lifespan. So some of the psychological assessment will be doing to understand the ability of that child, and when moving into adolescence or moving into adulthood, will be prescribing or will be going for assessing some of the tests to understand whether they are having any issues or whether they are having any problems like that. So for that, we are providing some of the psychological test is providing some of the standardized tests to understand or to investigate the problems in different areas of life. And when we come to the sum up of, or when we are summing up of the specific purpose of the psychological test, it is clear that, or it is clearly evident that psychological tests are currently being employed in the solution of a wide range of practical problems. So by using the psychological test, it can be done it as a, or it can be finding out a solution for a wide range of, or a broad area of some of the practical problems. It is being easily find out to the solution of the problems, solution for the problems. That is, we said that it is, we already mentioned that it is being used for conducting or recruiting the people into the military or into the organization setting or into the school, or in the school levels. It is being used, psychological tests are being used, and these all things are in the clinical, or in the clinical setting it is being used. By use of these all things, by using these all tests, it is providing a solution, it is providing the solution for a wide range of practical problems being affected with that area, like organization, schools, clinics, or the personal or the individual life, etc. And it is also for all areas of research and for many others, the precise measurement of individual differences made possible by well constructed tests. So when the people who are conducting some of the researches, and for many of the others, it is being used when they are being constructed well constructed tests can be done with these researchers to understand the individual differences or about the individuals.